Good afternoon, or namaskar, everyone. My name is Civic, and I'm the Program and Research Director at the Asian American and Pacific Islanders Commission of Massachusetts. It has been a privilege to lead our statewide survey efforts, and I want to thank you all for being here with us today at the State House for the official release of the Massachusetts Asian and Pacific Islander American APIA Community Survey Report. This work is deeply personal to me. I'm a proud Nepalese American and the daughter of immigrants. I came to this country as a child, navigating multiple identities and responsibilities, translating language, culture, expectations between home and the outside world for families like mine. Data has rarely reflected our lives with the care or accuracy that we deserve, and too often our experiences are overlooked or combined into broader categories that erase our unique realities. That's why today's survey matters so deeply. It's the first survey of its kind in the Commonwealth, groundbreaking in scope and intention. It centers the lived experiences of both Asian, American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities across Mass. It reflects a collective commitment to data equity, community voice, and policymaking rooted in cultural understanding and respect. It's more than just a set of questions. It's a first step into being seen, a first step in making sure that smaller communities like mine and so many others who call the U.S. home are finally counted in the data that shapes public perception and policy. Although, I want to be clear in saying it doesn't capture all of us who fall under the Asian American and Pacific Islander umbrella. In this first inaugural phase, we were only able to disaggregate data for Chinese, Indian, and Vietnamese American communities. That limitation is real, but so is our commitment to doing better. Our hope is that this survey lays the groundwork for deeper, broader, and more inclusive data moving forward, so that every voice, every story, and community is recognized deeper. We are grateful to our partners, UMass Boston's Institute for Asian American Studies, the Asian Community Fund at the Boston Foundation, API's CANS, and our survey vendor, Mass Inc. Polling Group, for their dedication and collaboration in this work. We also want to thank members of the Asian Caucus, Representatives Chan, Nguyen, Howard, Wong, Idahoven, Sangiolo, and Hong, as well as former Representatives Schmid, Mom, and Robinson. Their unwavering support, particularly through state appropriations, has been instrumental in making this survey possible. We hope today's event inspires reflection, sparks dialogue, and deepens our commitment to advancing equity in our communities. Thank you for being part of this milestone. And with that, it is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Watanabe of UMass Boston's Institute for Asian American Studies, who will speak about the origins and development of this survey.
Let me begin with a little vignette, and the vignette deals with back in the mid-1980s when people in Chinatown here, as you may know, have been fighting to try to prevent the expansion of institutional frameworks like the building of the Mass Pike extension or expansion of the combat zone or New England Medical Center into Chinatown to destroy some of the neighborhood qualities of Chinatown. And there's been a constant battle to do this. They're best reflected in the book Forever Struggle, written by Michael Liu, which is, I suggest all of you should read it if you're interested in Boston's Chinatown and the whole struggle that people in our neighborhoods have had to try to maintain their role in these neighborhoods. But there's one little story that talks about a group of Chinatown activists decided to invite Stephen Coyle, who was the head of the BRA, to come down to Chinatown and walk around. And so he came down and walked around, and one day he's walking around and he sees this little kid in a parking lot with one of these big wheel bicycles. He's playing, he's weaving in and out of cars and in the parking lot. And he sort of stops and he says, "What is that kid doing here?" And the people who are walking around says, "Well, Mr. Coyle, he lives in this neighborhood, and so that's what kids do. They play in parking lots and so forth, and they live here." And Mr. Coyle, it was the first time that he really sensed that Chinatown was a place where people lived. They raised their families. The kids played in Chinatown. It was not just the storefronts, not just the first floor things with the restaurant shops and the trinket stores. It was actually a place where people lived. But until that time, it had been invisible to him. That in some respects, Chinatown was just this place where you could impose upon it things like the combat zone, where you can build extensions of highways and so forth, and people wouldn't be affected by it. But he came to the realization that there are really people who live their lives and raise their families in Chinatown. And in fact, Chinatown to this day is one of the densest in terms of residency of any part of Boston. It's probably the densest in terms of residency of any neighborhood in the city of Boston. So it's actually a place where people raise their families and live. But up until that time, we've been invisible. And that leads me to this particular project. You know, for some 50 years almost, I've been a political analyst in Boston and asked various questions over time. And one of the questions I constantly get asked are questions, what are the partisan preferences of Asian Americans in Massachusetts? Or what issues do they consider to be important? These are common questions asked about other racial and ethnic groups in Massachusetts. But my answer to these questions has been, I don't know, because we haven't really done a study of them. We haven't done a look at the political behavior and haven't looked at the policy preferences of Asian Americans. That by studies that are based on polls and surveys, which is the principal way in which you find this data, Asian Americans have not been included. They've been in other category. And this is why this data is so important, because we're no longer invisible with this kind of data. And this effort, therefore, has been, for me and for people, it's been a lifelong dream to see that we can get an Asian American statewide sample that's large enough that we can use disaggregated data. It's one that we can do, do it in language, as we have done this one, and administer it fully and fairly and effectively statewide. And finally, we brought together a coalition of individuals to bring this dream to fruition. I want to thank the APIA Commission of Massachusetts, which helped tremendously. Jasmine responded to our call to provide some support and some talent in support of this project. I want to thank API's CAN, a wonderful coalition of Asian American community organizations. I want to thank the Asian Community Fund of this has now been established, and it's a great dream of mine to see that established, and glad to see that Paul Lee and Danielle Kim have brought that to fruition as well. And of course, I want to thank the other organizations as well who've been partnered in this project, which include the survey vendor, Mass Inc. Polling Group. We have a relationship with Mass Inc. Polling Group. They've done some wonderful research for us before, doing work on issues involving race and so forth. And they're a wonderful vendor. And we're glad to have them support us in providing the fielding of the survey and seeing that it was administered in an effective manner. And we want to thank all those who have come together for this particular process. And it's been a way in which the Asian American community decided itself that it wasn't going to wait until somebody else saw the value and seeing that our views got visible, that we ourselves in the community got together the resources necessary to put this together. And it's really that fight, that bringing together the resources to make ourselves visible once again, that I think is critical here. And finally, people ask me, what's the significance of this survey? Well, it's been out. It's been out. We've had a press release that just got released this morning. But I must say, I've received inquiries already from people in the press, and it's a dream to me that they're asking questions I could not ask before. They're asking questions like, what are the principal issues that Asian Americans statewide feel are important ones? And now I can give them an answer. They're asking me about how did Asian Americans vote in the last election, and do they support Trump's initiatives in terms of birthright citizenship and cutting of DEI programs and fast tracking of deportation of undocumented immigrants. And we now have some answers to those questions. So it's the answers to why this is important are found in the kinds of questions we're getting from people in the press and elsewhere. Right now, we can give them some answers to these questions, and therefore, Asian Americans we shall remain visible from now on, hopefully, and this is just the first step in what will be a biannual or annual survey of the Massachusetts Asian American population. So thank you very much for your help, and thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Watanabe. Next, I would like to introduce key partners and survey sponsors of the survey, Jaya Savita, Director of API's CANS, and Danielle Kim, Executive Director of the Asian Community Fund at the Boston Foundation, who has served as a AAPI Commissioner for nearly 6 years. Both Jaya and Danielle will speak to the importance of this survey effort to mobilize collective action and visibility for our communities. Let us first welcome Jaya Savita to the podium.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jaya Savita, and I'm the director of the Asian Pacific Islanders Civic Action Network, which is a statewide network of AAPI and working class serving nonprofits across the Commonwealth. It's hard to believe that I was here last month to launch our very first advocacy day, and now here again at the very start of June to launch this really significant survey. It feels special that both events have been framed by both AAPI Heritage Month and Immigrant Heritage Month. So just really appreciating this space today. The survey is a historic milestone, not just because it's the first of its kind, but because of how it was done through grassroots collaboration, multiracial partnership, and a shared vision for data that reflects our people's full humanity. Our network includes elders, youth and young people, immigrants and US-born community members, organizers, educators, caregivers, domestic workers, community members, who are all coming from across the Commonwealth. Many of them and many of us don't see our stories or ourselves reflected in standard data sets, media, policy, or the dominant narratives, but we are there and we are very much here. And now with this report, our voices are harder to ignore because we're telling our stories. As advocates, we know that data is never neutral. It can either marginalize or illuminate, and we're choosing to illuminate, to use this information as a tool to organize our communities, to hold decision makers accountable, and to demand policies that reflect the realities of our communities and what they face every single day. This report is a powerful starting point, but only if we use it. Let's ensure these findings don't sit on a shelf. Let's put them to work here at the State House, in our city halls, in press rooms, classrooms, and in every space where decisions are being made about our future and communities come to build power. So thank you all. And now I'd like to welcome Danielle Kim, Executive Director of the Asian Community Fund, to the podium.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many friends in the space here today. My name is Danielle Kim, and I'm proud to serve as a commissioner on the AAPIC, and I'm also honored to lead the Asian Community Fund at the Boston Foundation, in partnership with Paul Lee and QJ Shu, who's also here today. ACF's mission is to help unify the whole AAPI community across Massachusetts and help mobilize the resources and connections that we all need to thrive. This project is both a wake-up call and a call to action. It represents a unique partnership bringing together research institutions, philanthropy, advocacy organizations, and community voices to finally center APIA voices. Now is the time for us to be fearless and relentless, especially as we see harmful anti-immigrant sentiments spread across the nation. The purpose of our work and this project has never been clearer. Each of us here has the power to make a difference. This report and partnership represents an important milestone in uplifting greater visibility for our communities and harnessing our collective voice to advocate for lasting change. I hope that you'll join us in sharing these findings, advocating for API residents across the Commonwealth, and ensuring that all of our voices are heard. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our incredible research partners from Mass Inc. Polling Group. I first want to thank Steve Casella, the president, for joining us and for all of your leadership. And I'm really excited to welcome to the podium Masha Bowen, who will share with us the research findings from this seminal report.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Mahashaya Bowen. I'm a research director at the Mass Inc. Polling Group, and I'm excited to share the results of our 2025 Massachusetts Asian and Pacific Islander American Community Survey. So some quick background info on the survey. These results are based on a statewide sample of 1,414 Asian Pacific Islander American residents, hereafter referred to as APIA. We fielded it March 5th through the 31st. It was conducted via phone, text-to-web, online, and offered in 4 different languages: English, Simplified Chinese, Vietnamese, and Khmer. Results were weighted by age, gender, ethnic national origin, education, county, political party, and citizenship status to reflect the known and estimated population parameters of APIA residents of Massachusetts. We also want to thank some of the many organizations we worked with to design the project and the questionnaire: UMass Boston's Institute of Asian American Studies, APIC, API's Ken, the ACF at the Boston Foundation, and of course the study was sponsored by the IAAS at UMass Boston. Thank you all for your work and input on the survey. We have some key findings for anyone who wants to view these slides on our website at massincpolling.com. They summarize the more stark or striking results, but in the interest of time, we're just going to dive straight into them after a note on sampling. So actually, the next slide. One more. Thank you. APIA residents make up about 7% of the population of Massachusetts, according to the Census Bureau. This is something that Subecha mentioned, but serving a subset of the population in the single digits poses unique challenges. Our sample of 1,414 APIAs is an accomplishment, and it means we can disaggregate groups like Chinese, Indian, and Vietnamese Americans for some in-depth analysis. But it does have limitations. There are others we couldn't disaggregate because they didn't quite meet the threshold of about 100 respondents. We hope to do this in future waves of this survey, and we've included a disaggregated table of demographics at the very end of these slides for anyone who wants to review them. The biggest issue facing Massachusetts, according to APIAs, was inflation/economy, housing, and public infrastructure. This was an open-ended question we asked in a lot of our surveys, and what we found that API residents felt was that they shared many of the same concerns as other residents. One thing you'll notice in these results is that while the extent to which a given issue affects a group, it might differ based on socioeconomics like income, education, or region, the biggest concerns and struggles that people face are shared across the board. Next one. When we did break inflation and economy out by ethnic group and region, the people who reported it as a major issue, what we find is that there's not too much variation here. You'll see that Middlesex County and Boston's inner suburbs reported slightly less, but the bigger picture here is that it's an issue across region and ethnic groups. In their own words, residents say inflation affects not just housing, but education, tuition costs. One respondent says, no matter how much money we make, we feel like beggars. Public infrastructure was lower down the list, but people see it as intricately tied to public transportation. Public transit and roads were seen as the biggest things that needed improvement in public infrastructure. In the same vein, we gave respondents a list of items and asked them whether they had trouble paying for them in the last 12 months. We saw that housing emerged, not surprisingly, as one of the top items people struggle to afford. At least a quarter also said that healthcare, health insurance respectively, car expenses, and utilities were pain points in terms of affordability. We did notice that tech-related items were a bit further down the list. Not as many people struggled to afford a PC, cell phone, or home internet. We also noticed that lower-income residents overall reported more difficulty paying for these basics. And when we asked the open end, people who mentioned housing said that, for example, one lived in Massachusetts for 15 years, but the cost of housing and living had caused their quality of life to plummet lately. Another mentioned buyers need to earn more than $150,000 per annum to afford a home. We then tallied up, so this is the same question, but what we've done here is we tallied up the number of items people said that they had trouble paying for. In deep blue, you'll see people who had trouble paying for 3 or more items, and lighter blue, 1 to 2 items, and people who had trouble paying for 0 is represented by the gray bar. You can see that people with no degree, making less than 150 grand, or who had children in their household, struggled a bit more with affordability. This is not surprising, and we'll notice in the next slide too that this issue is largely driven by socioeconomic factors. We were curious though, we wanted to break this out by ethnic group and region to see if there were any stark variations. We'll see that there isn't a whole lot. It does look like Southeast Asians and the ethnic and national groups that we weren't able to disaggregate struggled slightly more than their counterparts. We also noticed that residents of Suffolk County stood out as having particular trouble paying for 3 or more basic needs. The larger trend that we want to really hammer home in these 2 slides is that this is driven primarily by income, education, and household size, a little bit more than region or nationality. We also broke out people who said that they had trouble for paying for housing in particular, and found that households with more income earners were more burdened than smaller households. We also noticed that if you made under 150 grand, you struggled particularly. When it came to age, you'll see that the oldest and youngest groups form a U shape. 18 to 29 and people who are over 60 struggled more than their middle-aged counterparts. The more interesting thing here in this slide is that we know that larger households and extended families are a lived reality, not just for APIA, but other immigrant communities. But having even 4+ income earners doesn't guarantee that you can outrun the cost of living or the cost of housing. And it was interesting that they actually said they struggled more than people who had just 0 to 2 income earners in their household. Once more, we broke this out by ethnic group and region with similar findings. It does look like East Asians were slightly less likely to struggle, and Suffolk County slightly more likely, but we'll see that nearly a quarter of every group broken out in the slide said that affording housing was a pain point. Next, we wanted to dig into healthcare. Not just whether you could afford it, because as Subecha said, a lot of people did say they struggled just affording healthcare and health insurance, but what does access look like? If you can pay for it, can you make appointments? Can you get to appointments? And can you find a provider who understands you? For APIA, the 2 most common challenges were scheduling appointments and finding a provider who understands their cultural background. Another major goal of the survey was to establish a benchmark for APIA political and ideological behaviors and leanings. This is something we haven't always had disaggregated data for, and we found that Massachusetts APIAs lean more to the left than the state as a whole. They voted for Kamala Harris more than they voted for Donald Trump, in line with national trends for APIA, and a plurality identified as liberal, 44%, compared to just 15% who identified as conservatives. And when we look at this by ethnicity and nationality, we actually do see a slight difference here. We notice that Indian Americans tend to lean most Democratic at 64%, and they voted for Harris by the widest margin at 66%. You also see a plurality of Vietnamese Americans were Democratic, but they voted for Harris by a slightly narrower margin. And they're also more likely than their counterparts to be independent or Republican. These results largely mapped onto ideological leanings as well. In other words, the same goes for liberal versus conservative for these groups. Nearly half of all respondents, when we asked them about civic participation, said that they participated in at least 1 or more political activities over the past 2 years. This is a fairly engaged group, and the most common activity was signing a petition or attending a government meeting. The differences in terms of engagement are driven a little bit more by partisanship than they are by nationality, with people who leaned either Democrat or Republican generally being more engaged than people who said they were independent or unaffiliated. Self-identified liberals, on the other hand, we saw were more engaged than conservatives or moderates. And finally, we'll see that citizens, either birthright or naturalized, were slightly more civically active than non-citizens, but not by a wide margin. Next, we asked what APIAs thought of some of the executive orders that had been made at the time of the survey. We know there were many that came out, but we ended up choosing 3 that we were really curious about. We asked about ending birthright citizenship, ending diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and increased deportation efforts of undocumented migrants. We'll see that a majority of APIAs oppose these measures, but that level of opposition varies based on a few different factors. We see in this chart here that ending birthright citizenship is by far the least popular order, but opinions on increased deportation efforts are split a little bit more evenly. So this chart here is looking at net support for these measures. So net support, I want to just clarify, is support minus opposition. You'll see most of this is negative, and it's highlighted in blue because in the vast majority of these groups that we broke out, way more people opposed these orders than supported them. You'll notice that support for these executive orders is largely driven by partisanship. While APIs overall oppose them, if they identified as Republicans, they came out strongly in support of all three to various degrees. The exception here is with Indian Americans, which you'll see is like the -1% there. So they're almost evenly split down the middle when it comes to their support or opposition to increased deportation efforts. One thing to note is it's not entirely just partisanship. There are other things that drive what people's opinions are on these, and this group is definitely not a monolith. So we wanted to look at the most contentious order at the time, according to the data. A closer look at support for increased deportation, as you can see, shows that despite leaning more Democrat and voting more for Harris, Indian Americans were the most likely of the groups who were able to disaggregate to support this order. Vietnamese Americans, on the other hand, came out with the strongest opposition to this executive order, despite being overall less likely to identify as Democrat and a little bit less likely to vote for Harris. And in their own words, APIA's views on immigration range from concern that as a state we have simply too many, that the state itself might be at capacity, to concerns for immigrants themselves and how federal programs affect their rights. When we asked APIAs what their expectations were of this administration and its impact on different aspects of this country, they were largely pessimistic. Around 2/3 thought that LGBTQ and immigrant rights, immigration policy, racism, and climate change would be negatively impacted. The closest thing that came to an exception to this was crime. And in that vein, when APIAs mentioned the federal government in their open-ended responses, they generally expressed concern that they were worried about reduced federal funding, they were worried about ICE, they were worried about attacks on free speech, housing programs, and on minorities. We also wanted to ask and understand how much APIA residents felt like they belonged in the United States. So while over 3/4 here at least somewhat agreed that they belong, which is heartening, only 39% strongly agreed. And we'll see that this affinity does vary a little bit by nationality and other groups. We noticed that Indian Americans expressed the strongest affinity, with 46% feeling they strongly belonged, compared to only 31% of Chinese and 34% of Vietnamese Americans. Similarly, citizens felt more strongly like they belonged at almost double the rate of non-citizens. When we inquired why those who said they didn't feel like they belonged felt that way, over 3/4 said it was, over 3/4 said that it was their race or ethnicity, followed by 39% citing immigration status. Overall, it seems like race comes out as the primary driver more so than religion or any other factor. We asked all our respondents what specific experiences they'd had with discrimination. More than 1 in 5 cited that they were either being discriminated based on identity or being called a slur. Verbal harassment, threats of physical assault, and physical assaults happened less, but they were all still on the list. And more than half of these experiences, next slide, sorry. More than half of these experiences happened in public places. We'll also note, although around 1/4 of those who reported experiencing discrimination said they'd experienced it in their neighborhood, at work, or over social media. We found really interesting, and maybe but not surprising, that feelings of belonging or not belonging are closely tied to experiences with discrimination. Those who disagreed or said they don't feel like they belong in the US were twice as likely overall to report 1 or more instances of discrimination than people who said they felt like they belonged. You have about 36% total. And this is people who said that they feel like they belong. That's still about, that's over 1/3 of them who said that they experienced discrimination. And the people who said they didn't, 72% said that they'd experienced some kind of discrimination in the last 12 months. And of the people who said they experienced discrimination, almost 2/3 of those who reported it didn't report them to any particular authority. Just over 1 in 5 said that they reported it to the police, and 16% to an organization like Stop AAPI Hate. We know this is a somber slide to end on, but we're proud to have had the opportunity to build on the data available on APIA experiences in Massachusetts. We look forward to working on future waves of the survey if we can. But we see the findings we presented today as a starting point, an important step to understanding what the APIA community struggles with, and we hope it helps the organizations and lawmakers here who already work tirelessly to serve them to better address their needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Masha. Just to add some more information on your program agendas today, there's a QR link, and if you scan that QR link with your phone camera, or if you want to type in the tiny URL at the bottom of the QR link, you can read the full survey report, which is out. Next, we're going to transition into the community impact portion of the event, where we will hear from Miao-Kun Ju, accompanied by Suzanne Lee, Chahat Kalia, and Evan Owens. Bless you. We were also We were also expecting Commissioner Bahara Husseini, who is Afghani, to come today, but she unfortunately was not able to make it. But we just want to acknowledge that she was going to express her story today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we also invited non-Hawaiian Pacific Islanders to participate as speakers today. Ultimately, they declined. They shared that past participation in similar spaces left them feeling used and tokenized. This response is really important. It reminds us that true inclusion goes beyond inviting people into the room. It requires building trust, practicing accountability, and ensuring that people feel genuinely heard and respected. We still have work to do, not only in our outreach to Asian and Pacific Islander communities, but in how we design and carry out surveys and efforts like this. As researchers, we strive to follow rigorous methods while also navigating real constraints like funding, sample sizing, and workforce. In this case, our sample is too small to disaggregate data for several groups, including Pacific Islanders, Cambodians, Burmese, Nepali, Korean, Japanese, and other smaller AAPI populations that didn't meet our 100 threshold. That's why today's speakers are so important. We've invited community members from some of these underrepresented groups to share their reflections on the survey and to speak to the broader impact on communities. We've also invited community members to share their personal experiences related to the survey's key findings, including high cost of living, housing challenges, healthcare access, and feeling of belonging in Massachusetts. Now, it is my honor to introduce Miao-Kun Ju, who is joined today by Suzanne Lee, President Emeritus of the Chinese Progressive Association. Miao-Kun is a dedicated home care worker who will share her personal experience navigating the high cost of living in Massachusetts. Like many in our communities, she faces the difficult reality of spending a significant portion of her income on rent, directly impacting her quality of life. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, Massachusetts currently has the second highest housing wage in the country. A person would need to work more than 120 hours per week at $15 an hour minimum wage just to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Miao-Kun's story reminds us that these numbers are real people with real struggles. Please join me in welcoming Miao-Kun Ju and Suzanne Lee to the podium.
Hello， 大家好，好高興認識大家。我首先介紹下我自己，我個名叫朱妙群，係一位家居護理工人，亦都係1199工會嘅會員，亦都係前進會嘅會員。我咧今日想講嘅咧，上嚟訴求嘅咧係想講下租屋嗰個房屋租金問題。
My name. Okay. My name is Ju Mil Kwan, or Judy. I am a home health care worker. I am a member of the 1199 union, and I'm also a member of the Chinese Progressive Association. So I'm here today to share my story with you all.
咁啊，我今日要訴求一個咧，就係想講下租屋嗰個租金問題。我咧就住喺昆士，租嗰間屋咧就係有2個房嘅。咁我咧就係同個女一齊住。咁我個女咧又啱啱係生咗個 BB 1歲半左右，而且咧佢都唔係話成日都可以出嚟做嘢嘅。咁咧就係只係靠我去做咧，咁我嘅工資咧都係我嘅租金咧就係2050蚊租一間屋，咁平均咧亦都係我嘅工資嘅78%㗎啦，啊。
So I share an apartment in Quincy with my daughter, who just had a baby, about 1 year old. And I support her and everything that our living expenses. So our 2-bedroom apartment costs us $2,050 a month.
咁我嘅工資咧都係20.05 一個小時，咁咧就如果我即係啲客人啊外出啊或者係住院啊咁，仲要我嘅工作時間仲要係減咗一半，咁咧就如果講到要交租嘅話咧，有時一個月咧都唔一定係夠錢交屋租，仲要向啲親戚朋友借。就算係承擔起呢個屋租咧咁沉重嘅負擔咧，個生活上咧都未必係可以生活得到咯，因為而家咧通貨膨脹啦，啲嘢又貴啦咁樣，啊。
So even though I have a little bit higher wage because I belong in the union, I get about $20.50 an hour, but I don't have stable work. A lot of time when my clients or my clients go to the hospital or other issues that they don't require me to go to their house. So I don't always get full 40 hours a week pay. So under that kind of circumstances, a lot of time we have to ask our relatives and friends to help out with the rents because I just don't have enough to pay for it. And when you can't pay for rents, that means that we don't have enough money for other living expenses either.
咁如果你話去申請嗰啲政府津貼嗰啲屋咧，又要等好耐啦。如果你話要去抽籤嗰啲屋咧，講唔定咧，可能仲比我而家租呢間屋嘅租金仲要貴咗啲。咁所以咧，有啲又太遠啦，地方太遠啦，有啲交通又唔方便啦，我自己又唔識英文啦，咁同埋買菜咧，亦都係一個問題。
So some people ask, well, how come you don't go apply for affordable housing? Well, I know there's a long waiting list. And not only that, some of the lottery housing, the rents they charge is even more than what I have to pay now. So it's not a reliable option. And I also have limitations of where I can apply because I need to live in areas where I can get Chinese groceries and things that I need. So anything further out in the suburb is not an option.
咁我咧就係喺2018年移民嚟到美國嘅。咁我當初嚟到咧，咁我啲親戚朋友都話叫我唔好去申請嗰啲政府嗰啲福利啊咁樣。咁樣咧，所以咧我就一直都冇去申請嗰啲政府福利咯。
So I came here in 2018 with my daughter, and at that time, many of our relatives and friends told me not to apply for any kind of government subsidy because that would be on your record. And so even till now, I'm afraid to do that because that's not something that I was told that I can readily do.
同埋 當時我嚟美國嘅時候，擔保我嚟嗰個人咧，亦都叫我冇申請嗰啲美國嘅政府嗰啲福利。咁咧況且咧，成日都聽到咧，政府而家成日都要削減聯邦政府嗰啲福利。咁喺我自己親身經歷都知道咧，喺我喺做嘢嘅時候咧，我有2個客人都已經本身佢係有14小時嘅工作時間嘅。咁而家削減咗一半，即係變咗得7個。咁樣嘅話咧，咁我哋咧對我哋嚟講咧，嗰啲工作仲更加少咯。
So as I said before, that I never applied for government subsidized housing. It's also because my sponsor, the person who sponsored me to come to the U.S., told me don't do that because it would impact on her too. Now, the current situation is this, because I know that the federal government's been cutting a lot of benefits. And my clients, 2 of my clients have their hours cut. That means I used to get 14 hours per person, now I only get 7. So I'm not even getting my full workload. So things are going to get more difficult.
咁我希望麻州政府咧就喺討論財政同埋政策嘅時候咧，就考慮一下好似我咁樣嘅人咯，咁睇下點樣可以讓我哋嘅生活更加穩定咯。
I'm hoping that when you hear my story, and particularly Massachusetts legislators and government, when they discuss their policy and their budget, to think about people like me. How can you help me to have a stable life? Thank you for listening.
多謝大家。
Thank you so much, Sheshe, Nia Quinn, Ju, and Suzanne Lee for sharing your story. I know in a space like this is really difficult, and hopefully the people who have power in this room, their ears are listening. Next was Commissioner Bahar Hussaini. As I mentioned, she is unable to attend today. So we are going to introduce Chahat Kalia. She is a API Commission Youth Counselor and high school student from Somerville, Massachusetts. While this survey focused on AAPI respondents, it did not include those under the age of 18. So Chahat will share her perspective on what that means and how survey findings resonate with the youth in our communities. Please help me welcome Chahat to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Chahat Kalia, and I'm honored to serve as a member of the AAPI Commission's Youth Council. As someone who is South Asian and a student, this moment is deeply personal to me. First, I want to thank the organizers, researchers, and community members who made this groundbreaking survey possible. Even though youth under 18 weren't represented in the first wave of the survey, I'm here to remind us that our voices matter. The issues raised in the report, housing, education, mental health, and public safety, shape our lives just as deeply, often in ways that tend to go unseen. We are the ones growing up in multi-generational homes where mental health is rarely talked about. We're navigating pressure to succeed while also dealing with racism, anti-queerness, xenophobia, and language barriers, sometimes all at once. Many of us feel invisible in our schools, and our neighbors, and sometimes even in data. So when we talk about why this survey matters, we're really talking about who gets counted and who doesn't. And that matters because when we're not counted, our needs are typically overlooked. Policies are created without us in mind. Resources are distributed without understanding what young people in our communities are actually facing. As a student, I see firsthand how mental health struggles show up in quiet but heavy ways. And the silence around asking for help, the stigma in our cultures that tell us to push through instead of reaching out. I think about how safety isn't just the absence of violence, but the presence of belonging. Being able to walk into a classroom where your name is respected or talked about and your identity is present without the fear of being judged or tokenized. When it comes to education, we're told it's key to take opportunity, but that's also where many of us face inequity. Through underfunded ESL programs, a lack of culturally competent counselors, and curriculums that erase our histories, these things impact how we see ourselves and how others see us. This survey is a powerful step, but it's also a reminder that organizations need to find a way to include youth voices in powerful data such as this. Because when we are not counted, we are more likely to be left behind. As a young person, I want to be part of a future where our mental health, our safety, our education, and our identities are not an afterthought. To the policymakers and community leaders in this room, thank you for listening. Please continue to listen to us, include us, and value our stories. Because we are not just the future, we are also the present, and we're ready to be a part of the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shahad. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Evan Owens, a recent graduate of UMass Amherst in Linguistics and Portuguese, and the AAPI Commission's former Regional Western Mass Coordinator. Evan is of Japanese and Native Hawaiian, Kama'aina, and Huppa, specifically Kanakamoli descent. Originally from Mililani, Mauka on Oahu, Evan now lives in New York, home to the 5th largest Hawaiian diaspora in the US. As of 2020, the majority of Native Hawaiians live outside of Hawaii, making Evan's perspective and work especially meaningful in connecting and advocating for Native Hawaiian communities beyond the islands. Please help me in welcoming Evan Owens to the podium.
E aloha mai ka ko o Evan ko uinoa no melalani makumakumaku o ahu mahava I mai au aka ke noho nei au ma New York. Mahalo to Subecha and the rest of the AAPIC for inviting me to speak here today. I also want to thank you for inviting other Pacific Islanders before me and for acknowledging the work that still needs to be done. While I'm honored to be here on behalf of other Pacific Islanders, I need to admit that I, as both a Hawaiian and a mixed-race Pacific Islander, am not fully representative of the rest of our community. Hawaiians are the largest Pacific Islander group in the US, which in turn is the smallest racial group recognized by the country. And we are also the only state. All other Pacific Islands under US occupation are territories, meaning that they are disenfranchised. They do not have the right to vote, they have no representation in our Congress, and they are limited to certain federal rights such as Medicaid or food stamps. American Samoa particularly doesn't even have the right to citizenship by birth, meaning residents born there are classified as non-citizen US nationals. Because Hawaiians have these rights and representation, particularly in the mainland, we contribute to the erasure of other Pacific Islanders. Furthermore, because the majority of Native Hawaiians are mixed race, we may contribute to the erasure of ourselves, as we can assimilate or identify with other aspects of our identity when it benefits us. When it comes to data collection, we may be put into a larger multiracial label, including all race combinations, meaning we are not counted towards the number of individual Pacific Islanders, which can become problematic if these numbers are used to allocate resources, funding, or identifying key issues. One of the key findings of the survey, cost of living, is particularly relevant to Pacific Islanders. Not only do many things have to be imported to our islands from the mainland, but housing prices are high due to many mainlanders investing in properties such as vacation rentals. This takes away housing from others and is one of the main factors that has led to the majority of Native Hawaiians leaving the state. When Pacific Islanders move to the mainland, not only do we not have access to organizations that only serve Asian Americans, but for organizations that do include Pacific Islanders, we still have to compete against a much larger population. That being said, I'm very grateful to say that during my year interning on the Asian American and Pacific Islander Commission, I witnessed a huge growth in its goal towards supporting and representing Pacific Islanders. My hope is that this can continue both within the Commission and in other AAPI organizations. Even when we are being included, I encourage you to consider viewing Pacific Islanders as separate and try to understand the unique issues that affect our communities. If it is possible, consider finding ways for them to be supported and represented without the risk of being tokenized or overshadowed. Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you so much, Evan. Next, we will transition to a roundtable with the Asian Caucus legislators. I'd like to welcome Vice Chair of the House Asian Caucus, Representative Tram Nguyen of the 18th Essex District, representing Andover, Boxford, North Andover, and Tewksbury. Representative Erica Eiderhoven, 27th Middlesex District, representing Somerville. And Representative Amy Ma Sangiolo of the 11th Middlesex District in Newton. This roundtable will be moderated by the AAPI Commission's Policy Director, Leela Ramachandran. So please welcome them all to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the state reps for being here, and for also sitting on the Asian Caucus and representing our communities in the ways that you do. I really appreciate it. So kind of starting off, I would love to hear if there were any findings that surprised you all or stood out, how these results resonate with your work, and also what you're hearing from constituents. And I will let anyone start.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. First, I want to recognize that we have some other legislators here as well. I know we have Senator Eldridge, and I think Representative Donald Wong was here as well. And I want to say that Representative Taki Chan really sends his regards. He's been spearheading a lot of our work here as our chairman, but unfortunately he's at a funeral at this time and isn't able to come in to join us. But we're thrilled to be here. So I want to first acknowledge this is 3 of your 4 Asian American women legislators in the entire legislature. Can we acknowledge that for a second? That the women here, women represent. So there's that. I'm so thrilled that you've all have been able to work on this survey. And I think the thing that really stood out is that this is the very first survey. How is that even possible that it's this year, and this is the first time that we are being intentional about outreach, about reaching out to communities often underrepresented to get their feedback. And so this is why we're so supportive of this work, because we want to make this more of a regular, everyday occurrence, that people feel like government can work for them, that they can feel engaged. The fact that you all are here is so inspiring to me, because I don't think that we've had many occurrences where we see this happening. And so that's number one. I also want to highlight the lack of political outreach. So it's both, it's a two-way street, right? People don't feel engaged, and parties and candidates don't do the outreach. And that's why I want to point out why it's so important to have the 3 of us here, or why it's so important for us to have the House Asian Caucus. When you have Asian American legislators, I can tell you that we are very intentional about reaching out to those in our communities. And in fact, this past month, in collaboration with ABAC and others, we've gone across the state too to support Asian-owned businesses. These are very intentional efforts, and that's why we want to do this sort of outreach. And so I just want to emphasize that we need to do better to make sure that people hear from us and that we have opportunities to hear from you. But I'll pass it along to my colleagues, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rep. Erica Eiderhoven, hailing from Somerville, so I just want to uplift to see, wonderful to see Somerville Representation Council. I think in terms of some of the things that were surprising for me, I wouldn't say it was a surprise. I think I will say the housing affordability being a top issue is so critical. And it's something that I always talk about as a rep from Somerville, where we have been at the forefront of the gentrification crisis. We have had, I mean, this was a few years ago, but the highest housing price increase in the state over the past 10 years. And we see that every day, and particularly with, while we're very grateful for the new Green Line, right, we see the transit-oriented displacement day in and day out, and it really resonates with the stories from Chinatown and other ethnic communities, because Somerville is a very diverse and has parts of our city are a gateway city, and so it's really, so important that we need to take housing affordability seriously as the legislature. It's something that I know is a really challenging problem, but I think that's something that is a big takeaway for me, and to see that be so prominent in our communities as a #1 issue is really resonant. I think the second thing, I will just kind of go and dive into it, the piece around the deportation having the relatively highest support really is still something I'm processing right now. And I think about how the Southeast Asian community here is the largest refugee population in Massachusetts. So I think about the erasure of that community, right? Because they are at the forefront of the deportation crisis and the layers of how the criminal legal system has layered on, right, and criminalized and sort of moved move the line, right, on what is being criminal, what's not. And a lot of these communities, because of failed policies, do have a criminal record. And that's something that, again, we can't, there is no such thing as a good or bad immigrant. And that's something I really want to break through, that is so critical, and that their erasure is sort of what I see when I see that survey data. So it's something that I'll need to keep processing, but that is, I think those support or the opposition against the Trump policies is something that we need to keep kind of thinking about. And I think, again, this is data disaggregation in action, which is very, very exciting. It is, the first of its kind. I cannot emphasize enough how valuable this is, and it's precisely this presentation is why we've been fighting for so many years for data disaggregation, so we can really understand, uplift, and support each other and our various communities that make up the Asian American and Pacific Islander experience. So thank you all so much for being here and for advocating. Oh, and one last thing I want to just add very quickly, sorry. The thing that I was very inspired by was the civic participation part. That is super cool. I'll just say it, speaking as a, growing up, I remember my mom really despised having to interact with the public schools, didn't want to get involved. If something went wrong, she was kind of like, you're on your own, I'm not dealing with these institutions. And then here I am running for elected office. But that is something that, to see that high up level of civic engagement on various levels, I see it as an amazing opportunity. And so I just want to uplift the work of APIs Can and your coalition on how we need to really be, it's strategic, it's the right thing to do, but we also, that engagement is something I'm very excited for the path ahead.
Hi folks, my name is Amy Sandriolo and I am a newly elected representative. Thank you for having me here. I would have to agree with my colleagues here that this has long been overdue, right? Having this kind of data for our community. We have been struggling to get data disaggregation. I'm glad to have been part of the effort to get here, and I'm looking forward to continuing the study, to reaching out to all the other groups who we were not able to reach. But again, this is the beginning of hopefully a beautiful, long-standing tradition of outreach and to all the communities that make up the AAPI community. We know it's very diverse. We know that we're not a monolith. I mean, it's very clear from the results. The question was asked what was surprising to me. And I had mentioned it was actually the political stuff that was very surprising. To see that there was that many folks who were actually participating civically. I didn't see that in my district when I was door knocking. I was surprised. I had a lot of folks who would not open the doors who were Asian American, who did not want to be involved in a political campaign. So it was nice to see that there are folks that are becoming more engaged, but it's also clear that we need to do more. In terms of the housing, I agree with Erica about the need to create more affordable housing, but we need to be more intentional. We can't just let the market go and do it. I know a lot of people think just build, 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 but we have to be intentional about what we're building and who we're building it for. And I think this data is very clear that we're not building it for the people who need it the most. So thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you, Rep. Sangiolo, for that transition. Our report really highlighted that housing was a top concern, particularly among API communities, as you all have kind of alluded to and commented on. And this crisis is pretty unsustainable. And so I'm curious, from your perspectives, what concrete steps is the Commonwealth taking to address the housing affordability crisis? And how are you all planning to work with colleagues to improve some of this, to ensure that the issue kind of receives the urgent and adequate attention that it deserves?
So I agree with everything that was said, but to add on to that, we need to remember that last session, we're talking about $5.16 billion invested in affordable housing through this act, and that is a huge number. That is something that we need to really take stock of. The abundance theory is very true. When you produce more, that is how we can bring down the prices. But I agree, we need to be very intentional about where they're built, who they're bringing in, and so that's where we need to continue to work with you all to make sure that it has the intended consequences that we want it to, and that is to bring affordability to our residents to help them out. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about is part of that is accessory dwelling units that have been added to that bill. That will help so many Asian families. Many of us have multi-generations, and this will allow for parents to be able to stay within the home. Also help out people who are taking care of those with disabilities. So these are measures that we're taking, but we also are very aware that one size fits all is not going to work. And that's why the listening session is so important for us. A big part of making laws is listening to the people about their needs, the barriers they're facing. And so this is why continuing such conversation is so key, and being able to ensure that language access is available to folks, because what's the point of having all of these programs or laws in place if people actually don't understand what rights they have, et cetera. And going back to why data disaggregation is so key, we need to understand what types of languages people are speaking here in our state, so that we can make sure that materials and information that are being dispersed are in those languages that are accessible to people. And of course, in addition to building houses, we need to talk about protections for tenants. And what does that mean? For many of you, I think some of you know me. For others who don't know me, I was a legal services attorney with Greater Boston Legal Services prior to getting elected, doing a lot of work with advocates there in terms of tenant rights, et cetera. And we need to prevent displacement by providing more assistance to folks, and of course, providing assistance to first-time home buyers too, so that we can keep talent here. We have amazing universities here, and don't even get me started on the attacks on our international students and our innovation, and just all the things that are happening that are affecting our economy. But we need to help people stay here, because whatever talent we lose, we're losing them to China and other places that are very harmful to the Commonwealth and the United States. And so these are some of my thoughts, and I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely agree with all that. One thing I want to just uplift what we heard from Miao Kinju and Suzanne Lee earlier about working class people and affording the rents. We're very proud of the work we did in the legislature a few years back to raise the minimum wage. But the reality that has happened after we have phased that minimum wage increase in is that the rents caught up and actually went even further. So people are actually paying an even larger percentage of their wages into rent across the board. And I think that's something I hope as a next step with this data work, right, that we further understand how that's impacting our communities. So that's just something I sit with, because I'm a very vocal and proud supporter of rent control or rent stabilization, however you want to phrase it. But that is something that is a very critical tool in the toolbox that unfortunately is going to be, I know, an uphill battle in this building, but it's something I think we need to continue to build that movement for, because while we can raise the minimum wage again, we're going to end up in the same place 50 years later, so long as housing is so commodified and used as a financial investment over being a roof over people's heads. So that's, I think, one. And I do want to uplift too, while this is not Massachusetts, there is a candidate who is in second place in New York City who is running on freezing the rent. He, if he wins, would be the first Southeast Asian Muslim person to represent, be mayor of New York City. And that's, deeply exciting, and perhaps will hopefully change the narrative here as we start to see, as New York is a very similar economy to Massachusetts. The second thing I just want to add around decommodifying housing, want to uplift the work of the Asian Community Development Corporation, as well as all other nonprofits, vehicles. We have the Somerville Community Land Trust, the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust. I know other cities have similar mechanisms in place, but these are ways that we can make permanently affordable housing, and it really just takes that small amount. And I'm very excited. I want to uplift the bill that you hear me? Sorry, that Trump was uplifting earlier about how that funding can be used so that we can ensure that we have more permanently affordable housing in our districts. But oftentimes it does feel like a small drop in the bucket, and we really just need to be pushing for much more bolder change that we ensure, as Amy uplifted, right, that this money is being invested in building or converting housing to be permanently affordable, but it's invested in the communities that need it most and the people who need it most. So that's another big takeaway for me.
It's great to be on a panel where you agree with everybody, everything that everyone says. But yes, I mean, I worked at the AG's office in housing, and trying to keep people housed is so urgently important. Listening to the story that we heard earlier about the high rents that are faced and the lack of having a stable income, clearly we need to do more. It's great that we have rental assistance programs available to folks, but if folks can't participate or feel that they can't participate in it, then we do need to adopt measures such as rent stabilization measures, try to make sure that we keep rents down by limiting junk fees that are often attached to rents, try to get rid of broker fees that are also attached to rents, trying to do all we can for either our first-time home buyers or the people who own homes, because mortgage companies are constantly swooping down trying to foreclose and then making a profit on folks who have struggled to get that home and to stay housed and to get that generational wealth so that they can pass it on to folks. So I think the legislature is doing a lot. If you look at the dockets of our housing docket and seeing what the great work that some of us as well as our colleagues are working on, I think that's positive. But we do need to keep the channels of communication open so that we hear ideas from you who are on the ground, who are serving our community, who see the needs that are out there that we may be missing. So just let us know. Thanks.
I appreciate how all of you are commenting on kind of intersections of our communities, right? So folks who are experiencing displacement or opportunities for intergenerational households, folks with disabilities that might benefit from ADUs, accessible dwelling units. So thank you for those comments. I feel like these findings have probably just reaffirmed many of your priorities because you all are leading in such important ways. But have your priorities shifted at all? How do these connect to what you all are working on right now?
So I'm new, so I would say that I'm not sure that my priorities have really shifted because, again, I'm coming from the AG's office, so housing is number one. I think what we can do to empower our communities in terms of providing more support for our small business communities, I think we need to do that. I support the unions in terms of making sure that everyone has a livable wage. I think those are probably my top priorities, and I think I will continue to work hard, if not harder, now that these results are out there.
Well, this question that's kind of challenging our confirmation bias because we, of course, run on a platform and then have to uplift it. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's certainly affirmed a lot of the things that have been a priority for me, particularly around the affordable housing piece. Certainly, I am very interested. One thing that has come out, and with all of the awful things, I know impacts all of our districts with the giant, deportation machine that has been kidnapping and disappearing right over, just hundreds, if not now thousands of people in Massachusetts. I really think about how we can center that work, whether it's at the grassroots level and what we can be doing as a state. One thing that we've responded to is around legal aid, but that's on like a one-on-one basis. It's valuable work. I really want to uplift the work that Rep. Wynn has been doing on that front. But I wonder about, right, particularly with those questions around the support for Trump's policy, how we can center this around community organizing, because that deportation support statistic, again, I know it's relative, so it's still, negative, right? But the fact that it was quite high and not as big of a gap as I would have expected, that makes me wonder how much we need to be really investing in that sort of on-the-ground grassroots organizing that's happening to resist these awful and frankly unlawful deportation and detainments that we're seeing. Something that I've been thinking about a lot too, and this is not, I I struggle because I'm not an attorney by training, but one thing that is really clear is that what Trump is doing, it's against the law in Massachusetts. You can't just abduct people, right? And it's happened with Rumeysa Öztürk in Somerville. You cannot just show up unmasked and just take people off the streets. Like, and is that something, a legal tool, right? That it has not been filed as a lawsuit, but is that something that we need to be pushing for or changing, right, with respect to our laws here in Massachusetts, you know, that intersection of the criminal kind of legal system, and then how can that be used to stop this kind of horrid behavior from the Trump administration is also something that's kind of challenging for me right now, and like how we can center that work more and more strongly and forcefully.
I can't agree more with that. As someone who came here to the U.S. as an immigrant myself, I came as a political refugee. I practice immigration law. These issues are very personal to me, and it is alarming to see the disappearance of our residents, right? And when dealing with federal agencies, there's no easy answer. We need to be very thoughtful, we need to be very intentional, but at the end of the day, during this time of uncertainty, we need to continue to show that this is the time for state government to be there for the people against the federal government. And that's why it's so important for us to continue not only work with each other, but to work with our federal colleagues, to work with the Healey-Driscoll administration, to work with our AG. For those of you who are not aware, the AG just this week just came out with a Know Your Rights, all these tools in different languages. We need to make sure that those things get out to people. We need to continue to protect ourselves and protect one another. And so going back to your original question, the survey really reaffirms our priorities. I'm just gonna be very real with you. We're not going to be able to make up the billions of dollars that we're losing in federal funding and grants, right? We're gonna do what we can, but it is going to be tough. As for those who've been following the budget cycle, the House passed our budget about 3-4 weeks ago. The Senate just did it last week. We're moving forward with our priorities because we're, for the last few months, our economic forecast has been steady, but this is not guaranteed. And so we are bracing ourselves for the worst, and this is time for all of us to continue to support nonprofits, to support those organizations that are on the ground doing food insecurity work, helping people to find housing, doing that day-to-day work, because state government, even if we use up all of our rainy day fund, we're not going to be able to even make up for a small percentage of what would be lost from the federal level. And so it takes all of us coming together to build a stronger, more inclusive Commonwealth for all. But it also takes all of us to make sure that, again, for people to know that we are here to do what we can to serve all the people and also make sure that we provide opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background, zip codes, or otherwise. And so this is why I appreciate the collaboration so much, the coalition, what the AAPI Commission is doing, and making sure that this is not a one-time occurrence, that we want to bring you back here again and again so that we can continue this discussion.
Thank you all for that. And I especially just want to thank you for commenting on kind of this national climate and what we are all kind of navigating outside of showing up to work and doing the thing. I, in my community, am coming off of ICE detentions yesterday, and so that feels very resonant and a little bit raw right now. So thank you all for your work. I appreciated that one of you kind of said, like, this is data disaggregation living. And so we are doing this in action. And so I'm curious if you all have comments around what role data disaggregation plays in shaping policies that really reflect how diverse our APIA community is in Massachusetts, and how we can work together to build more robust policies for all of us.
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think right now we're in this phase where, there's a myth that, like, once you pass a law, it's like done. And it's like totally not. Like, it has to get implemented by the administration. And so that's the phase we are in now, that this bill was passed relatively recently. And so I think for me, there is an element of how do we incorporate this with how the function of the government, and how do we have these conversations with the Healey-Driscoll administration, as well as, the AG, on like the importance of how that data is being collected and also being used, right? And I just, the first thing that comes to mind, particularly because I think one thing not always hear, but I think one thing that's very resonant to me when we come together as a community is this trauma of invisibility, right? And being made invisible and not having yourself seen, and then that weight that it puts on our youth. And all of your youth to elders, but the reality is, one thing we've started having conversations about, but we weren't able to really go much further than just based on limited information we had, was around mental health and healthcare, right? And then I think about our schools and how our schools don't have like culturally competent counselors. I had a lot of, again, well-meaning educators who reinforced racial stereotypes on me when I was going through the school system. So I think about how this data can be used by these various departments so that we can make our curriculums represent the people, and the students in the classroom, how we can have our healthcare providers be culturally conscious and kind of going that next step after the data collection of like what needs to change and what priorities need to take place. Those are some that just come to mind right now, but I think, as we move forward and start to work with our respective executive offices on their data collection, again, it takes time to set up these infrastructures, and we need to hold that as well. But that is something that is very vital, and it's something that I'm particularly focused on with respect to public safety, because that is particularly an area where that data has just flatly not been collected. We are marked as other. And that should not be happening. And so that's something that I'm looking forward to continuing that work on.
And I want to add that the invisibility is actually going to be really crucial for us to address now, because during times of scarcity, everyone's fighting for resources. That's why data disaggregation is so important. We need to dispel all of the model minority myths that are out there, that all Asians are well-educated, we're apparently living in mansions, where we have all these high-paying jobs, but we know that is not reality. That's why when you break it down by individual ethnic groups, you'll see that many communities, I'm just gonna speak about the Vietnamese community specifically, many of us are newer immigrants. Many of us continue to live in urban areas where they're struggling with, especially our seniors, in terms of access to a lot of resources. And this data is going to be very important when we're talking about scarcity of resources, how to make sure we're not overlooked when these resources are being dispersed to others. And so I am just so thrilled that we, Representative Chairman Chan was the one spearheading with many of you here. I've seen you all, and when I was an attorney with GBLS, I also worked on this. And we need you more than ever to make sure that that data is being used so that we are not leaving any community behind.
There's not much I can add to the discussion other than the data really helps us as legislators really put those resources to the communities who need it most. And we know, we heard from our youth about the need for mental health, right? Mental health resources. We know that we don't, as Rep. Eiderhoven had mentioned, that we don't have the educational competency in our public schools, and we need to teach more culturally competent material. I think Rep. Nguyen is leading on that effort. So I think that's why data disaggregation is so critically important, as Rep. Nguyen had mentioned. Getting over that model minority myth, right? That's the hardest part. People overlook, the Asian community because they think, oh, they're all fine, but we're not, right? We're all very different. I know that, I'm the granddaughter of an immigrant who came over and had a laundromat. My father and his siblings were all born in that laundromat, and they each had a different story, right? And that's why it's so important to not only get the data, but also get the stories out there of our communities, right? Our struggles and how we get there and how we can use those stories to help each other, right? That's the importance of the stories. So I think as legislators, we have to take that data, see what we can do in terms of getting the resources out, and support all of you who help our community on a one-on-one basis. And that's really hard.
Thanks for illuminating that behind all of the data that we're seeing that is super important to collect, there are also people and stories behind it. And thank you each for sharing pieces of your stories. How can we, as the APIA community, partner with you and all of your colleagues in the legislature to advance some of these long-term systemic changes, particularly around things that came up in the survey around economic insecurity, healthcare, educational disparities that APIA residents face across the Commonwealth?
So first of all, we need more of us in the policy space. As we continue on, I don't want us to just fill this room. I want us to fill the Great Hall with people who want to be engaged in this. Voting is powerful, but running for office is also important. Serving on boards and commissions, for those of you who have seen my bill, Parity on Boards, that is very crucial. That is where a lot of the decisions are made, and when we're not at the table, decisions are made without us. As well as organizing. Organizing is going to be key to make sure that people get the information that they need and also to give us the information. And of course, to support people who share your values. We talk about representation and why it matters. Well, when I first joined, I was the second Asian American woman to ever get elected. And then we got Rep. Iderhoven, Rep. Vanna Howard, and then now Rep. Sanjolo. And then we had Representative Maria Robinson, who came in with me, and then just one other before me. So in total, there's 6 of us, women total, and then we have represented, a few of the men. They're great, but at the end of the day, we're still at 7 people, you guys, out of 200. What does that mean? And it's not just at the state level, it's at the local levels as well. So how can we continue to support one another to not only get us into these spaces, but to help us move up, to make more meaningful changes? So that's something important to think about. And also, we need to build bridges. That's why partnerships and coalition building like this is so key in the work that we do. I'm, so happy that we get to partner with the Asian Community Fund, for instance, or Aspire, or ALBI, many of these other groups that continue to support particularly Asian American women to get into these political spaces. And we need to organize across generations and background too. We have to work in that way so that when we move the needle, we're moving it for everyone. And so I'm just very thrilled to be able to be vice chair of the House Asian Caucus, where we get to support so many community events, organizing so many gatherings across the state to allow for people, regular people, to interact with politicians, to normalize that. We are regular people. We want to eat, we want to hang out, we want to chat with you. I know it's so daunting. I remember when I was an attorney at GBLS and I would bring in some of my clients to testify on bills. That is so scary. We can give each other that support so that people feel more empowered to share their stories, share their lived experiences, and make sure that policy really reflects their realities.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to build on that, I mean, one thing, what you all are doing right now in terms of having your advocacy day, getting here in the State House, I mean, I'm all about how do we get more people into these halls of power, right? And I mean that in every facet as well. And, particularly one thing I always say is that we're not going to get this done with just 200 of us. This is a statewide effort, and we need all of you all because, well, a lot of us, we're agreeing right now, right? We are not the legislature. So we need your help, right? We need your help engaging with our colleagues and having those really important, meetings. I think that's one thing that, rallies are great, right? On the State House steps, lobby days are important, but then having those real, just like small group meetings with your legislators are so powerful. And that gives you the opportunity to really share your story, right? To humanize these issues and to advocate, as well as to say, hey, listen, I'm going to follow up. I'm your constituent. We don't get here without those votes, right? So that's something that I really just want to encourage, because again, those figures in that survey about civic engagement, let's get those numbers higher, right, next time around. And that's something I think that is going to be so vital for this work. And I appreciate, Trump, you uplifting this need for more of us to run for office. And I just wanted to build on that I never saw myself running for office, and I know that there are really clear systemic gender and racial barriers for people who look like us to run for office, and I'll just speak for myself. I mean, the biggest barrier for me was that I was mortified about telling my story because I don't fit into the white imagination, and I don't fit into that white imagination because of our curriculums and because of the stories that are not told and the fact that Asian American Pacific Islanders are rendered invisible, right? These are all systemic issues. And so I think one thing I just want to offer as an invitation is that think of running for office or joining a board or commission or whatever that next step be, or even meeting with your legislator or elected official. Think of it as an act of solidarity, right? Think of it as something that is not just done for yourself, but it's for our whole community. It's how we stand together. And that's, I just want to share that because that's how I'm able to pick up the phone and ask for donations, because that is deeply the most uncomfortable thing to do when you run for office, is to ask people for money for your campaign. When I think about it as, no, we're pushing this platform, we're pushing these issues, right? I'm doing this with my community, that takes the edge off for me. So I wanted to offer that to encourage all of you to take those big steps.
So I'll just add including running for office and becoming more civically engaged, invite us out to where you are. It's great that you all come here to the State House. It's great for our colleagues to see how many are so concerned about different issues, but bring us to your communities. Let us see what you're facing on the ground, right? That's real, particularly for me, right? I live in Newton, and what happens in Newton is different from what happens in Somerville, is different from what happens in Boston, is different what happens in Quincy, right? I want to know what's happening, on the ground and what you guys are doing. And I will bring that back to my colleagues and tell them, this is what's happening, and this is why need is so important. And it's so critically important to pass whatever legislation or whatever bills or whatever funding needs there are. So feel free. Don't just come to the State House. You're always welcome. Yeah, absolutely do that. But also invite your legislators out to the districts where you live, because that way we can see it firsthand.
Thank you for sharing some of how you all are leading, what your priorities are, how these connect to some of the data that we heard, how you all have invited folks to join you in the State House, both physically and also as electeds, and getting more involved on the local level. I'm curious if you have any kind of quick last thoughts around how folks can be stronger advocates as it relates to statewide policymaking. I think you, Rep. Wynn, mentioned kind of storytelling, and that being really important and being able to support others in doing that, but looking to see if you all have any suggestions. And sometimes it can feel confusing or intimidating to be here.
I'll just add, in addition to telling your story, have a clear, hard ask. Don't ever leave without that hard ask. And that's the same when you run for office, right? You have to ask, can I count on your vote on this election day? And it's very similar to that. It's asking, can I get your support on this bill? And without asking that, you just don't know, right? People can have a very lovely conversation, but to have those, that really does, forcing that question, right, then opens up many other doors. Because maybe the answer is no. Okay, well, let's engage with that, right? What can happen, right? What are things that you would be willing to get on board, right? That makes the advocacy much more richer but you have to start with that hard ask and the clear ask, that I'm here to ask for your support. And I think it also just makes things cleaner, right? It's like, we're not just, there's a reason why we're here, right? And so that I think those questions are really what guides that advocacy. So I just want to invite that and to start to launch that dialogue with elected officials.
That be as specific as possible, but if you can't be specific, invite us all to be there to problem solve, right? To help us figure out, okay, here's the issue. What are the tools that maybe we know about that you don't know about that we could go and try to formulate a solution, or that bill that we can shop around to our colleagues? I think that's important as well.
And to add to that, I encourage you to just start small. Get on the ladder of engagement, right? It doesn't need to be something big. If you care about an issue, join a coalition. There are many coalitions out there. I can give you an example. I'm working on a bill to make sure that we have more inclusive education. A lot of folks here are part of the CARE Coalition. You can just get engaged with that so you can get updated on where bills are at, when we have hearings, so that you can get involved. But there are many bills that, that you probably care about that affects your everyday lives. So make sure that you are also bringing people along. It's so much easier if you go to a coalition meeting with a friend and then the friend gets involved. And so it's all about community building, so that it's less intimidating, you're building that confidence, and you're bringing more people into the conversation so that we can have more innovative solutions. And so again, I'm so glad that you're all here. How about next time we make a promise that you bring 2 people each? Then we triple the size of this room, which would be really exciting to see.
Thank you all so much. I invite folks to join me in a round of applause for Rep. Sangiolo, Rep. Eiderhoven, and Rep. Wynn. I'm going to hand this off for a Q&A section.
Hi, everybody. Now it is time to take everybody's thoughts, what reflections, and now the questions are now the audience. So I'm going to turn it to the audience. Does anybody have any comments, questions, reflections? And I can hand the microphone to you. If you do have any, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Inke. I'm a youth counselor for the commission. And a few months ago, I attended an event where Yasin spoke about health in Worcester. And it's how immigrants can have access to healthcare, the lack of access to healthcare. And my question is, how does legislation support these people regarding healthcare access during this time of a new administration and a lot of political shifts?
We have one of the strongest healthcare systems in the country, and the ACA, the American, oh my gosh, what does it stand for? CARE Act, thank you. The American CARE Act is based on our protections here. And so healthcare affordability is something we take very seriously here. And so for us, we are committed to covering for those who need the care. But what we worry about is the long-term Medicare and Medicaid costs. Right? And so these are ongoing conversations. Like I said earlier, we don't have the solution now because we cannot make up for the loss of federal funding. But what I can tell you is that our protections right now are not going to change, given that we are looking to protect and give access to as many people as possible.
Thank you. You can ask questions to the legislators, the speakers, the researchers involved. So anybody else have any questions, reflections, comments?
I'm looking forward to the next phase. So I'm just wondering, whoever's in charge, when is the next rollout, or when is the next phase? Because clearly this is the start of a beautiful journey, and I'm just curious on when that is. And I don't know who to ask.
Dr. Washington, you want to answer, or I can answer?
Our challenge is to be able to raise the money that's going to be required to do this. This is something that's expensive to do, and it's the reason why a lot of this research is not done on Asian Americans. And it's hard to do because we're such a complex community. We're hard to get the numbers up to the numbers that we need to do, and we need to have the demands for data disaggregation from a lot of sub-Asian groups. And we want to have as much of that as possible as well. So we have to raise money, and this time we raised our own money, and the help of some money provided by the legislature indirectly. But we're going to need some support from not only the Asian American community, I think, but the broader community as well, because they have to see the value of this data. And I think if you're a business association or something, you see some value in knowing what kind of information we can provide in this sort of study. It's not only legislators and so forth that can use this data. All people can use this data in various ways. And I think it's valuable to do that. And it's just like the disaggregated data that's asked for in the state legislation. Understand that the disaggregated data in the state legislation is administrative data. It's different than the sort of data that we're looking at. We're looking at survey data, which is critical kind of data, but administrative data is critical to also look at the reality of what's happening in terms of Asian Americans. And this is what the state aggregated data legislation really directs itself at, is administrative data. And I think it's critical to have both administrative data and survey data working together. And that's the way we get a real true picture of what's happening with the Asian American community. So we're working hand in glove with you guys in trying to see that disaggregated data legislation actually gets implemented here in Massachusetts. And we're going to continue to fight to see that this survey of this kind is either done in mainstream surveying that's done in Massachusetts, or that they be able to regularize this process of at least every other year, perhaps every year, having this survey available to us that we can do the comparisons over time and ask new questions about new policy questions that emerge as well. So we're going to come back and ask the legislature for its support. We're going to ask the public for its support. We're going to ask philanthropic organizations for their support. We're going to ask a broad coalition of individuals, as we did this time, to help us do this, because we think it's a valuable first step. And we're going to have to continue. We agree with you that you got to continue to do it.
Just to summarize, we hope to do this every other year or every 2 years, and then we hope more people and more organizations get involved. Anybody have, okay.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm with Sampan Newspaper. This is a question for the legislators. I was curious, in the next iteration of this report, are there any specific questions or data points that you would like to see that would be most helpful in your legislative decision making?
To be honest, I haven't done a deep dive on this, but we'd love to be in touch with you. So once we do a complete look through of the data, we would love to see where the missing links are, but this is exactly why communications is so key. And frankly, I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now, given the current political landscape. So I'm assuming new issues will emerge, and so that's why this collaboration is so key.
I mean, I think I'll just add maybe that, I think these political questions were really the big ones for me. So like you said, it's going to evolve, but I hope that the next iteration, or where we kind of go from here, it's helpful for us to understand how people are responding to these various policies. And I know there was more emphasis on the federal government, but I'm also very curious about, potential, again, throwing ideas out there, but ideas on people's responses to Massachusetts policies, right? Especially as we move forward and potentially consider some bigger changes out there, right? I mean, that's something that I think has always been a valuable tool in the legislature, to know that, oh, there's public support for this. And we saw this with reproductive rights. We saw this with prescription drug pricing. We saw this with, there's many things that we polled on, and it was statewide, but I think as the Asian caucus, right, for us, that's a really powerful tool for us to have, especially again as we move forward and see what types of policies are being considered or on the table. To have that kind of polling data is really, and I know it's very expensive, so we appreciate everyone who made this possible.
I definitely agree. I think it'd be, moving forward, there are going to be more issues that we're obviously going to be concerned about, but it would be nice to know, did our housing bond bill reach the people that it needed to, right? The work that the funding that we've done for immigrant legal defense, did it help enough people? Clearly, it's a small amount of money, but we want to know that that's the right direction that we're going in. I'd love to see whether or not schools have implemented some of the, more diverse, culturally competent, curriculum. I'd like to see whether or not we had any influence in making people feel more belonged. By making it easier for folks to report hate crimes or other discriminatory incidents. That's the kind of stuff that makes us know that what we're doing is in the right direction, or if we need to do more. So I think that would be helpful. And also, more information from our youth and our elders. If we can break it down even further to see, what are the specific needs of each age group, I think that would help.
Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Hello, my name is Catherine Chung. I'm with Asian Women for Health, and I've just want to say I'm very, very excited about this research. As someone in the community-based organization, we know these are true, we hear stories, and sometimes when people ask, like, well, where's the data? And you're like, well, we don't have that, and it's just very frustrating to kind of have that. So very, very, as Dr. Watanabe was saying, very excited to say, like, here is our data, here's what you see, let's just get past that and get to the issue, right? Because as Jaya said before that, a lot of these data, you have to contextualize it, you have to make it relevant and bring those stories, because it's never just a number, it's really about what goes behind that. So I think one of the comments for me is I'm very excited that for as a organization majorly serving Asian women, but also communities, is to really bring that visibility and also check our own biases, right? Because we see them in the stories, and there's some parts of this data that was a more confirmation than some of the other research that we're doing, but also was a little surprise for us. And also very excited to hear that from all of you representatives, but also saying that not only that we're here in the State House, but also we love to be at the communities. So just more of an excitement and just energy to move forward in this current climate and really have this collaboration that makes sure that organizations are talking to politicians, that research, and it's really much of a community and coalition that we're building. So thank you so much. I'm just excited to read everything as a data geek and excited to participate in the future reports.
Okay, one more time. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Hi everyone, I'm Bhavika Kalia and I'm a high school student at Somerville High School. I just wanted to first start off by saying thank you so much for being here and representing all of us. It just feels amazing to be seen and heard. I heard a lot of you guys talking about how you guys want to make a more culturally competent curriculum, which I think is absolutely amazing, and I really hope that will happen, and I love that you guys are working on it. But I was just wondering, like, what else or what more can we do to better support Asian American youth in Massachusetts, and what are more things that we are doing currently?
Well, I think one of the things I think about with particularly for Asian American youth beyond sort of like what we're teaching in public schools, but I think about, I mean, community centers. That's something, I know we're both in Somerville, but the fact that Somerville does not have a youth center. And then never mind, I just want to uplift that Malden just closed the deal on the Greater Malden. It's an Asian American community center, which is so exciting. So I'm very excited for the next steps of that. But I think of like those spaces where youth can thrive and also, I mean, learn, various aspects of like civic life as well as, whatever your interests may be, right? Whether it be art, athletics, and all that. I think, outside of the school time is really important. And then I know I've said this earlier, but certainly the support for mental health is something I hear across the board. But then when you layer on the stigma, right, the cultural like competency or lack thereof, I think those are additional barriers that particularly I think of Asian American youth, and just thinking of myself when I was young, right, like I did not have access to any of that. And so that's something that, I think about in terms of supporting youth. So we're excited to hear more ideas as well. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see the Youth Council here, and you guys are already engaged, but encourage your friends to get engaged and encourage them to volunteer as interns or volunteers for organizations. As I mentioned earlier, nonprofits and other organizations really need the help right now. And also we have internships in the legislature as well as other government agencies. So there are opportunities out there, and frankly, all of those programs need to be a lot more diverse. So it takes you encouraging your colleagues who are Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiians to really find these opportunities and support each other in joining them.
Just quickly, the CARE Coalition has internships that you can do in our offices. So that's just, one of the.
Now, I think just letting us know, either pick up the phone or email us to let us know how we can be helpful, because the needs are going to change, right, from year to year. There may be some new horrible thing that Trump does, right, or federal government does that's going to impact our youth, not just cutting or eliminating the ability of folks to be able to go to college or continue their education. There might be rollbacks on holidays, right? Celebration of holidays. So I think just keeping the channels of communication open is really imperative, at least for me as a legislator, and I'm sure for my colleagues here. We want to know what we can do to help you.
Thank you, everyone. Now we're going to transition to the closing. So I'd just like to give one more round of applause to everyone who asked questions, to the representatives, and to Leela. Next, I'd like to welcome our Executive Director of the API Commission of Massachusetts, Yasmin Pedemsi Forbes, to give reflections and a word of thanks and close out our program. Please welcome Yasmin to the podium.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I am so proud to be here and thank everyone in attending in person as well as people listening online. And thank you especially to all the legislators. That was a wonderful discussion that we had, and also for people who came all the way from Western Mass, as well as folks here from the Canadian Embassy. So I think hearing these deep insights from the Asian Caucus really makes me reflect on the historic nature of this survey. And this survey has only been possible because so many of you have believed in the importance of data disaggregation and have believed into turning it into policy and action. So more than 1,400 individuals across the Commonwealth have taken time to fill in the survey, and community members helped to translate it into various languages. And the lead up to the survey has taken over 2 years, and there are a lot of people to thank for it. So I would like to start off by thanking my colleagues Subesha and Dr. Paul Watanabe. Thank you for the countless hours you have dedicated to this work. And your leadership and integrity have really helped to shape the process, grounded in this rigor and amazing report that have come out. I would like to thank all the commissioners and our partners. Your collaboration and expertise has been really essential to this process. Thank you especially to our chair, Commissioner Satvik Ahluwalia, Commissioner Karen Chen, and also our former chair, Gary Chu, and Tuet, who has also been very involved in this survey. We also have Commissioner Danielle Kim, who's also the Executive Director of the Asian Community Fund, and Paul Lee, who also has been very instrumental in supporting the survey. Jaya from AAPIC, Shauna Lowe from UMass Boston's Institute, and the team at Mass Inc., Steve and Marsha Bowen. And of course, we are very, very deeply appreciative to the huge support we get from the Asian Caucus reps. And that includes Rep Chan, Nguyen, and Howard, Wong, Edohewen, Sangyo, and Hong. And also all the former representatives that have been, very helpful. Your commitment to equitable data and inclusive representation has been really essential. I'd also like to thank Maeve from Rep Chan's office, who has been really helpful in coordinating so many things, and of course the dedicated staff of the commission that includes Lizette, Monita, and Catherine, who also helped in managing the PR and communications. And a deep thank you to Leela and Jennifer, our former staff member, for all the policy advocacy that they have been involved with in the past 2 years. And thank you to all the speakers that spoke here. And we had, I think, Inju who left, and Suzanne Lee. Commissioner Bahara was planning to come, but couldn't because she's not well today. And of course, Jahar from our Youth Council, we're so proud of you. And Evan, who came all the way from Western Mass. I think hearing everyone, the community speakers speak, it really makes us know why this work is important, because it's not only theory that matters, it's the lived experiences of people. And the survey it's not just a product, it's a commitment. And a commitment in making this progress into a regular practice so we can continue gathering accurate and culturally grounded data. And it's so important to also hear that what we have right now, where this data is also important to look at how state policy impacts people. And that is something that we should really look into as we build a survey. And the commission is, plans to hold listening sessions on this survey and translate it into at least 9 different languages. So let's carry this momentum forward. And thank you very much, everyone, for being part of this meaningful day. And, this is like the start, like everyone said. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.